Morning, a little hazy outside, but a beautiful day. We're going to continue in our learning from Hebrews chapter 3. This morning, the Apostle Paul is going to share with us the concept of being careful that we don't go in the direction of hardening our hearts. And he gives us one very key tool to help us to combat the movement toward unbelief or skepticism or despair. So this is Hebrews chapter 3, beginning with verse 7. As the Holy Spirit says, "Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did in the rebellion during the time of testing in the wilderness." He's talking about the Jewish people and their exodus from Egypt, where your ancestors tested and tried me, though for 40 years they saw what I did. And that is why I was angry with that generation. I said, their hearts are always going astray. They have not known my ways. So I declared on oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest. And so for those who are not at peace with God's direction and purpose in their life, there is no rest. And that's kind of the stage for this. And when there's no rest for the soul, when there's a constant battle and an ambiguity with what it is that we're called to accomplish, that lack of rest leads to doubts and eventually ends in the hardening of the heart and a distance from our Maker. So Paul's now going to give us a really good idea of what is it that we're supposed to actually do so that that does not happen in our lives. What's happening in the wilderness is, for the Hebrew people, there's just great spiritual lessons in that for us. They experience God's great purpose in their life, even through a physical miracle and the parting of the Red Sea, and they cross, and no sooner do they cross the Red Sea and begin their real journey into the promised land, then they start to complain. And they say, there's no water, there's no food, we were better off being slaves back in Egypt, and they just start to complain. And it is the complaining that is kind of the foot in the door for a heart being hardened. It is that view of life as being negative, painful, I deserve better, God doesn't supply, there are no resources, this isn't fair, this isn't right, why don't we just go back to the old ways? And so in a battle against that, that's where we don't want to go. In our battle against that, Paul says, okay, let's do this. Now listen, this is not Paul, I'm the writer to the Hebrews, sorry. He says, see to it, brothers and sisters, that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from God. But, now here's the transition. Let's try something different. Encourage one another daily, as long as it is called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. We have come to share in Christ, if indeed we hold to our original conviction firmly to the very end. As has just been said, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, as you did in the rebellion. Who were they who heard and rebelled? Were they not all that Moses led out of Egypt, and with whom he was angry for 40 years? Was it not those who sinned, whose bodies perished in the wilderness, and to whom God did swear that they would never enter his rest, if not to those who disobeyed? So we see that they were not able to enter because of their unbelief. And so the writer is very firm in establishing that we have to, and this is key for us, especially coming out of a pandemic, we have to encourage one another. We have to encourage one another in our faith to be together. It is this concept of fellowship, one another, and what we're doing when we're with one another, the encouragement that we should be sharing with one another. Living in isolation, as many have, or simply having our own concepts of what we should do and what our purpose is and why am I here, and coming to those conclusions ourselves instead of as a group, it leads us to unbelief and to hard-heartedness. And so the writer says, listen, if you want to battle against unbelief and skepticism, then you should be encouraging one another. All the more reason for us to get together. One of the reasons I'm doing this with you is to encourage you in your faith walk so that you know you're not alone. Sunday we're going to try a new experience at the 11:15 service. We're going to live stream the service, and we're going to try an interactive service. And the point of the interactive church service is to encourage one another. Let's talk about how we can lift each other up in a grand way so that we don't become cynical and skeptical. I'm even going to do one of these Sunday morning after the message is delivered so that we can talk with each other about what it means to be a Christian and growing up in faith. And so I want to just to give you that word of encouragement. I want to read this but concept. There's this pathway to unbelief that is through isolation and complaining. And then there's pathway to strength and a stronger faith and a more reliable purpose for our lives. And it begins with this word but. See to it that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God. That's none of us who are listening to this. Do we want a sinful, unbelieving heart? So, but here's what we do. If that's really what we want. Encourage one another daily, as long as it's called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. And in a few weeks, we're going to talk about that word today. It's just it's a capital T, and it's a very specific meaning about related to Sabbath. And one of the things that we do as a part of our Sabbath rest is we meet together to encourage one another. It's not just learning from the Bible, it's living from the Bible, living out our lives together. And so I want to spend just a second here as we close, encouraging you in your faith journey so that you might not lose heart or become hard-hearted in your life, that you might have sincere, strong faith. So today, you're going to have a good day in the Lord. And I want to encourage you in that. So find what is good and right and holy. You know, I talked with my father yesterday, and he and my mom, you know, they're in their 90s, they've had their car keys taken away, and they still live by themselves, and they're lonely, they feel isolated, and I could tell that he was getting discouraged. His voice is discouraged. And so I told him, I said, you got to find one good thing today. And I told my mom the same thing. You got to find one good thing today in your life and let your heart center upon that, because if you spend all your time bemoaning what you'd rather be doing or what you think you should be doing or despairing over what you can't do, it's not going to help you. It's not going to help your faith. But if you can find a way to encourage one another and find one good thing to do in the day, then your faith will become stronger. And I would say the same thing to you. Encourage one another in our journeys. If you're feeling alone and you're waiting for someone to call you, I would encourage you to take the initiative and call someone. Talk to each other. Too many times people say, well, nobody calls me. And my dad even said that. Nobody from the church calls me. I said, but you have your whole Bible study that you went to for years. You have friends in that group. Just call them. and talk to them. And that is really what this text is saying. We have to take the initiative to encourage one another, not wait to be the one who needs to be encouraged. We have to take the initiative into that. And so I would say, in your life and in my life, take the initiative and learn to encourage one another. May God add his richest blessing to you this day, and I hope you have a great week. I'll